So welcome everyone to our supported internship funding question and answers webinar. We've put this webinar as an additional activity as requested by you, the sector area, to just look into funding for supported interns in a little bit more detail. My name is Elaine Dale, Director of Sender at City College Norwich, and we also have Chris Cademy here, who is Head of Registry at City College, and Debbie Watson is our team leader for support at the college also. So let's talk through what you can expect today. Questions to prompt a funding discussion, so what that might mean for you. We're going to look at our funding model as well as access to work. ILR data inputting, very important to be able to claim funding, and questions and answers at the end, although as I've noted there is an opportunity to be able to ask questions throughout. So without further ado, let's get on with it. So for those of you that attended my other supported intern webinars, there's a couple of bits in here that I'm just going to highlight for you here and whiz through the first couple of slides, and then spend a little bit more time on the funding part of the webinar. So there is a paper here and a link there from that's a research paper on supported interns and the findings and proposal for 2020. DfE guidance, which is absolutely critical for the current state of play on supported interns and how you can extend their internship for this year, and some guidance on that for those that are currently in the workplace, and some high needs operational guidance as well. So some additional links there. So this is what I was talking about a few moments ago with the Department for Education update and how you can extend an intern, but that of course that needs to be agreed with ESFA to allow any payments that need to be followed through. But details in that link beforehand. And as I've said, I've noted that in a previous webinar, so I will move on. So questions to prompt our funding discussion, just to get us all going, is EHCP learners, excuse me for my rogue people that have just popped up in the screen there. So EHCP learners, we need to just think about those and how they actually draw down funding, and the age range that we need to consider. That's critical for engaging with funding. Supported interns need to be based within the employer, not at the college, so it's completely different, and so you do need to have a workplace supported intern to be able to, for the Department for Education ESFA to be able to understand what that is, to be able to draw down the funding. We'll look at the staffing structure and what that looks like for us and how we draw down additional funding of element 2 and element 3, and we'll do a little bit of discussion around access to work also. We will also cover overheads and tell you all about actually how essential overheads are and what we cover in those. And most importantly, we will show you and talk to you about our ILR data inputting. So things that we need to do and to think about. So these are our critical parts. If you don't get these bits right, you can't really draw down funding. You need to be able to input to the ESFA through the ILR. You need to make the local authority aware to be able to agree to all of that, and of course to agree to element 2 and element 3 funding. And if that's not available, then it's Department for Work in Pensions and Access to Work. And many FE providers nationally use access to work rather than element 2 and element 3. So you've seen this on a previous slide, but I just want to touch base with this with you, because this is absolutely quite critical when you're thinking about funding and who to bring in on funding and how to claim that. And so the blue section on the left, as you know from my previous webinar, is what the Department for Education recommends, and the slides to the right is our structure. So the dark pink is our structure, and then the lighter areas is where we use staff from the workplace. They don't come into, that part of it doesn't come into our funding claim, but absolutely critical in terms of what we do. So are there any questions and anything we need to answer at this stage? Please feel free to speak. If not, I'll move on. Okay, that's a good sign, I think. So now let's go on to the main aspect of the purpose of today is about the funding model and our approach. So in order to be able to claim funding for any supported intern, there's some critical factors that we need to consider. The learner must be between 16 and 24. When we're looking up to 25, we want them to still be to have their EHCP plan in place. And so we want them to start their internship before they're 24. Ideally to have an education, health and care plan. Now that needs to be in place to be able to access funding through the ILR. Now, you know, on my previous presentation, we do take learners without an EHCP, but you can't claim for those in the same way, or indeed through the ILR. And Chris might want to pick up on that earlier in a little while. The reason why we do take learners without an EHCP, because if they are absolutely right for the program and we do have a space, it's about learner progression and right place for them, and funding, we always say, comes second, although it's absolutely a critical and essential part. So where best, you need a learner with an education, health and care plan. And of course, this is funded for us through our core funding, and we use element 1, and that's based on our lag and how many learners that we've had previously, so that every college will be slightly different in terms of the income that they gain from element 1, but that's through the ESFA. We also access a high needs funding element 2, which is up to £6,000, and then anything over £6,000, which is element 3, we access that pot of funding as well through our local authority. So, for example, our supported interns annually cost 7,600, and that's for each supported intern. So if I run through the set of information above, we are drawing down our core element 1, which is approximately for us 4,500 based on our college lag, up to £6,000, so it's a little bit of a top up for our element 2. And then a further increase of element 3 because of the cost of the 7,600. So we access a little bit more of element 3. And with that, I have to say, I will go through a breakdown of what that looks like in a moment, just so that you're able to see that. But I wonder, are there any questions and answers about element 1 and 3 till 3? Please do ask if you're not sure about what that actually means. Okay, I move on. So let me just talk down a breakdown of that costing when we're looking at our interns. And so if our interns cost around about £7,600 each, and we have 20 interns, that's the amount of money that we will be claiming. And for us at the college, we have two sites, as you are aware if you've joined my previous webinars, 10 on each site, and so that's how we break down the costing. And let's have a look at what that looks like. So if you've seen my previous information, we don't claim any funding for the tutor because that comes down in our core funding in element 1, and we have our tutor is placed over the 2 sites. So we don't use the tutor as a fractional member of staff, as the Department for Education states, because it's off the job training rather than in the workplace, because you'd have the job coach supporting in the workplace, and you'd also have the workplace mentor in there. So for our tutor, does an awful lot of work on the coordination and the teaching of the job, but that is funding access element one. Then you can see that our job coach and support staff, they have contact and non-contact time, and they access element 2 and element 3 funding. So we're able to attract some funding for that. And because it's a small group of 10 students on each side, that we then factor in a small group cost of £500. Then we come on to our overheads, because overheads are absolutely really important in what we cover. So there will be a small percentage for myself in there. There'll be a small percentage for Debbie, who's the team leader, is allocating support. There'll be admin costs. There might be some Senko costs, and those build up. And as you can see, that's how much we allocate overall per student, and that's the total cost that we would have. So if we break that down, when we're looking at these costs here, I've noted some comments here about actually what our tutor costs are from core funding, and how much that when we're looking at their how much that their job is, and what we pay our members of staff. So you can see how much we're looking at here. And then there's our overhead costs as well. So I hope you find that part helpful in terms of a breakdown of costs. Are there any questions that we need to answer at this stage? Oh, you're all being very good and very knowledgeable. That's excellent. Let's move on to the next one. So when we're looking at what that might look like in a breakdown, now you have seen this slide previously, and this is the work that Debbie will undertake. Now I've given you a small screen grab of this. I will send you our costing spreadsheet after the webinar. So that's important to have your email addresses if I haven't got those already. So I can send you what this looks like. And so we will do this for support staff as well as for the job coach. And we will do this on a weekly basis. And you can see there that Debbie's put in week commencing the 21st of September and then the 28th. And she will do that all the way through for the whole academic year. She will put in what's the shared a resource is in terms of hours, which is 3.7 hours, and then a percentage cost of non-contact time, where the support staff will be working through records, doing prep work, etc. For the student. And we do exactly the same for the job coaches as well, because then that breaks down into, when we look at this pulls through on how much our hours are for average hours each week, but actually the overall termly costs for our support staff. And then we can allocate when we're looking at that, and that's how we do the breakdown of costing against their salary. So it's quite straightforward when you've got the mechanisms and tools to be able to do that. Any questions and answers at this stage that we need to help with? Right, good, wonderful. So I've talked previously about the access to work through the Department of Work and Pensions. So there is the fact sheet and guidance here that you'll be able to refer to. And so for those of you who joined my previous webinar, you've been able to access this. I do hope that you are able to talk to your local authority and access element 2 and element 3 funding, rather than having to go through access of work. It has been quite arduous, and I know that Department for Education are working hard to make that, to simplify that and make that a lot better. But the types of things that you can claim would be on this, where you're looking at this placement. I've just done a little bit of a snippet here so you can see the type of things that you have to claim for. and the task and responsibilities. So things like support staff, things like the job coach, traveling costs, etc. What is advantageous for this process, I would suggest, is when a learner does gain full-time employment, they might still want to access to work, and they'll be able to do that with their employer. So if they have some knowledge of that, then they are one step ahead of our interns that have just had our support with funding. As you know, there is a webinar, a video here that you're able to have a look at, and I do urge you to have a look at that to be able to and navigate your way around the system. So it's quite a useful guide. So for those of you that can't access element 1 and element 2 and you are tasked with access to work, do have a look at that. Are there any questions and answers at the moment, or shall I pass over to Chris, which I think he'll be coming on to in just a moment? So over to you, Christopher. Thank you.
Okay, just a test. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, that's all right then. Thank you. Okay, so this slide is just basically showing where the ILR documentation is. It's on the gov.uk website, and if you just search ILR specification and validation rules, then they're really important when you do start to do supported internships. One is to read the ESFA funding guidance to make sure that what you're doing complies with the funding regulations around supported internships, and also the ILR specification, because the ILR specification tells you how to code your data. So for when you submit it to the ESFA, that it's coded correctly and meets all the funding requirements. So if you are audited in the future, you know that your data is going to stand up. Okay.
Can you see that slide, Chris? Can anyone hear me? I seem to have lost Chris.
It's all right. I somehow, I'm back now. It muted me all of a sudden. So I'm back. I'm back in the room, should I say.
Good.
So supported internships must be recorded with learning aim reference code Z002347 for funded students to record as part of their study program, which is obviously, we've talked about supported internships, is delivered mainly on the employer's premises for young people aged 16 to 24 with learning difficulties, disabilities, or have a education healthcare plan. And it's for those who apprenticeship is not really a realistic option. Colleges, providers must record further details of the supported internship using work placement data. So the learning delivery work placement entity is used to collect additional data about where the work experience is, where that's taking place. And when a work experience learning aim is returned as part of a student internship, the aim must have one or more work experience records associated with it. So if, for example, you return a learning record and for a supported internship and it's got no learning aim record associated to it, it will error. And if a learner does multiple work placements during their program, then a separate work experience aim must be returned for each placement that takes place. So for example, you could have one that takes place from September to December, and then one that takes place from December to March. Then it will be, you'd have two different aims there to record those two different placements. For our internships, they mostly take place at one employer.
So can I ask a question, Chris? So for the reference code, the Z330 that you've got at the top of the document there, that's the main aim. So what would they then have to put in? Is there an additional reference code that they'd have to put in for each intern or for each placement?
No, the main aim will just need to be recorded, but there will be an additional one for each placement. So if a student does two placements in an academic year, there would need to be a work experience learning aim that's sent off that's separate.
Right. That's very helpful. On to the next slide, Chris.
Okay, so this slide, you can see the work experience learning aim, and that work experience learning aim is ZWRKX001, and that learning aim needs to be returned for each work experience placement that gets, that the student's undertaking, and that is a non-regulated learning aim, so that must be associated with the learning aim on the previous page. And the work placement entity has to have the following fields populated. So the work placement start date, so if it starts in September, you'd use the September start date. The work placement expected end date, that can change, but you need to put in the work placement expected end date, so how long you expect that to run for. The work placement hours, the work placement mode, and really important is the employer identifier. So the EDS number, and you can look that up using a gov.uk functionality, but you need to record the EDS number for that employer. So when the ILR record's sent off, the ESFA can look at a learner's record, they can look at where a learner's placed, they can look at the start date, and they can look at the end date, and they also know which employers are doing internships. So really important that those fields are populated. When you submit an ILR, it will validate to check that those records are complete and are correct, but really important you get the EDS number right for the employer. And if it's an employer that does apprenticeships, they'll be used to providing their EDS number. The sixth point is really important actually, is that the local authority have to return details of internships that are happening within their county. So they will contact you. It's normally at the December time, because they will need to do return details of the internships that are happening to the DFE. So that needs to be completed and sent to local authority. And it's really important before you start doing internships or increasing the numbers that you liaise with local authority and let them know what you're planning to do, as obviously they will most likely be providing some support or funding through the Element 3.
Thanks, Chris. Chris, I've got a couple of questions for the audience. Could you tell me what a placement mode is for inputting data?
Yeah, the work placement mode, it's just a number of codes, and you identify how that work placement is happening. So I can send that on afterwards if it would be helpful for people. I can send the fields on, but it's just letting them know where and how that work experience is happening. And there's a couple of fields you just need to fill in, which is a numeric value. And it's all in the ILR specification.
Thank you. And Chris, my other question is, when are they expected to complete the ILR? Does that need to be right at the very beginning of a supported intern placement? When is the best time that your team are doing that?
So if it's for an ESFA student, you need to get the ILR completed for return 4, and that's the return that calculates your student numbers. So return 1 is August, return 2 September, return 3 is October, return 4 is beginning of November. It needs to be in by then. We always make sure ours is in and fully coded by September, just so we know that information is shared and people know what we're doing. But RO4 is the latest you can get that information in. If you miss that deadline, they don't count towards your student numbers for the funding calculations, which take place in January.
And the RO4 is in October, is that right? Or is
It's
that
November?
November.
Yeah.
So that's helpful for everyone to know that. Thank you. So I've asked a few questions. Are there any questions from the people here today that we need to help with answers?
I have a quick question. So with the supported internship program that I'm setting up with our college, we're looking at doing a 2-year program. So for the first year, they'll do a pre-internship year. And then the second year, they'll do a supported internship year where they actually go out on placement. Can we still claim for ESFA funding if they are doing a pre-internship year?
You'd probably need to look at what you're going to deliver in that first year. So what is the study program going to look like? And so long as the program that they do within the first year meets the requirements of the ESFA funding rules for study programs,
Yeah.
then that will be fine. But what I'd suggest doing is, instead of, I wouldn't put it as a 2-year, you can advertise it as 2-year program, but I'll do it as distinct 1-year programs with 1-year start and end dates.
Oh, okay.
Because otherwise you won't be able to do because you'd have to do 12 months on the pre-internship and then 12 months on the internship, because the ILR coding is very different for those two programs. You wouldn't be able to just change your coding in the second year.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, so I know with the ESFA we have to do, I think it's 540 minimum hours. So
That's correct, yeah.
Last time for, like that amount of time every week, then so say like 16 hours a week would be enough to.
Yeah, and you have to make sure that you've got some kind of English and maths built into that program as well. But you just have to make sure that you've got a design there that demonstrates why that pre-internship's needed and what to map that intended destination route to the internship.
Yeah.
Is that Sarah?
Yes, it is. Yes.
Hello, Sarah, it's Elaine. I think you and I have talked briefly about your pre-internship. For me, that sounds like our ticket program, where we've got it's almost a pre-employment, the preparation for a supported intern. And I think the way that you've described this to me, your pre-employment, where they'll be doing some on-site activity, and building up their employability skills. They might do the odd experience of work placement, but that looks like that's a program of study. And I think that needs to look quite different on your ILR. And I think that you can still access element 2 and element 3 funding for that. But I think the way that you're designing your pre-internship, that's on site, whereas the second year, that's where you're looking to place on rotations with an employer. And so that's where I think that's your supported intern, where you're looking for, that's your ILR, where you're able to use the data fields that Chris is talking about. Would that be right?
Yeah,
that's correct.
Yeah, that makes sense. With the maths and English, because I know with the supported internship they do mainly like maths and English skills. They don't necessarily have to do a qualification. But for that pre-internship year, would it have to be a qualification-based maths and English?
That depends on whether the exemption that's there. If you feel they're exempt because of a learning difficulty or disability, you'd either have to make the decision, that would be an institution decision, whether they do a stepping stone qualification or whether they do the functional skills or the GCSE, for example, or whether you decide actually they're exempt from the maths and English condition of funding, but you still need to demonstrate that they're doing, maths and English is still part of that program.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Thank you so much. Thank you for your help, Chris.
And what Chris means by that with the exemption is that we have some of our students that have an education, health and care plan cannot cope with running an English and maths qualification at the same time. And we have an exemption panel where we go through individual learners to be able to say, and it's not a sort of a sweeping statement, we do look at it a case-by-case basis, where we say, well, this student A can't possibly manage, because of looking at their education, health and care plan, to be able to put them on functional skills, maths and English. However, we do want to work them towards a qualification, and so we'll have a stepping stone towards that. So they might do something that's non-regulated, or do an entry-level maths 1 term, see how well they do, and then an entry-level English the 2nd term. But that has to be agreed. And then once you've actually got that in place, that exemption process for whatever that might look like, that's how you then need to input that into the ILR. Chris, is that right?
That's correct, yeah. So yeah, we do have a panel that sits, and a member of my team sits on the panel as well, and we really do scrutinise the exemptions for anybody, and it has been held up as a good practice. There's got to be real good justification as why there's going to be an exemption. And then the ILR is coded to say they're exempt from English and or maths. So it doesn't count towards a limiting factor within when your funding's calculated.
Now, Chris, perhaps we can help Sarah a bit further, because when the learners move on to a supported intern, whilst we embed maths and English, they don't undertake a qualification in that respect. Can you advise Sarah and what we actually do as far as the exemption process? I mean, Michelle will actually say they are actually at work and undertaking work activities throughout the course of the day, and so we're simulated employability and being in the workplace. But what does that mean in terms of the ILR?
So the ILR, so there's two ways, there's kind of three ways it would be recorded. So if they're doing a stepping stone qualification or a qualification, you know, working towards that maths and English, would put that in the ILR. So they could be doing a working towards maths, perhaps a gateway qualification in maths and English that's a recognised stepping stone qualification, that would be in the ILR. If they were doing a GCSE or functional skills, that would obviously be in the ILR and that'd be coded. If they were just working towards maths and English, what would make sure is that when we've done the exemption process, when we actually have it written down, how that maths and English is embedded into that program. So if it's a supported internship, it will be that with working with the employer and working with the job coach and working with the tutor, this is how maths and English is being delivered through naturally occurring evidence and the kind of day-to-day working that they're doing on that supported internship, would make sure that's noted on that exemption form. So when an auditor came in, they could see that we've thought about it and we'll follow the process. But also at any point, if Ofsted looked at that program, they can see that we're still building maths and English and still following those study program principles.
Thank you, Chris. Any other questions that we need to pick up on? Okay, so just a little bit on what's coming up. As you know, I always like to do a little bit of a prompt and promote that we've got our supported employment agency webinar coming up in October, so do keep an eye out for that. But are there any further questions? If not, I say thank you very much for attending today. Has that been helpful, everyone?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Has that been helpful for other colleagues attending today? We've got a comment in the chat. Yes, thanks. That's absolutely great. Well, thank you very much for everyone for attending today. And thank you very much to my colleagues, Chris and Debbie. So thank you. Bye-bye.